The engine turned over on the first pull. After 37 years sitting in that barn, it should have been seized solid, rusted beyond repair, nothing more than a 1,000-pound paperweight. But there it was, humming like it had just rolled off the factory floor. Cade Morrison stepped back, wrench still in his hand, staring at the impossible machine before him. His brother River circled the engine slowly, running his fingers along the pristine metal surfaces that should have been eaten away by decades of neglect. The fuel tank caught the morning light streaming through the barn's broken slats, and when River tapped it with his knuckle, it rang with a strange, heavy resonance that neither brother could explain. Something was wrong with this picture, but they couldn't put their finger on what. The Morrison brothers had driven 400 miles to this foreclosed farm outside Amarillo, Texas, with their last $800 and a desperate plan. Their family repair shop back home was bleeding money faster than they could patch the holes. The bank had given them 30 days to catch up on payments, or Morrison Brothers Automotive would become just another casualty of small-town economics. Every piece of equipment they owned was already mortgaged to the hilt, and their customer base had dwindled to a handful of loyal locals who paid more in friendship than cash. Cade, the older brother at 34, had spent the previous week scouring online auction sites and classified ads for anything they could flip quickly. Farm equipment was hot right now, especially vintage pieces that hobby farmers and collectors would pay premium prices for. When he found the listing for this 1950s Farmall tractor engine, supposedly in running condition despite being barn-stored since the 80s, it seemed like exactly the kind of diamond in the rough they needed. The seller, an elderly woman named Mrs. Hendricks, had inherited the property from her uncle and just wanted everything gone. She met them at the gate that morning with tired eyes and a ring of keys that looked like they hadn't been used in years. The barn smelled of old hay and motor oil, exactly what you'd expect, but the engine itself defied every expectation. No rust, no corrosion. Even the rubber fuel lines looked freshly installed. River, 29 and built like the high school linebacker he'd once been, had always been the more suspicious of the two brothers. While Cade focused on the mechanical perfection before them, River found himself studying the details that didn't add up. The concrete pad beneath the engine was stained with fresh oil, despite Mrs. Hendricks claiming nobody had touched the machine in decades. The fuel tank, when he pressed his ear against it, seemed to contain more than just old gasoline. Mrs. Hendricks watched them from the barn entrance, shifting her weight from foot to foot like she was eager to finish this transaction and get back to her car. When Cade asked about maintenance records or the engine's history, she just shrugged and said her uncle had been a peculiar man who kept his business to himself. But as they prepared to load the engine onto their trailer, River noticed something that made his blood run cold. The fuel tank wasn't just heavy with old gas. It was heavy with something that shifted and clinked when the engine vibrated, like metal pieces sliding against each other in liquid. And Mrs. Hendricks had been lying about something, because when she thought they weren't looking, her hands were shaking. River grabbed his brother's arm and nodded toward Mrs. Hendricks, who had turned her back to them and was fumbling with her car keys like she couldn't get away fast enough. The sound from inside the fuel tank had been unmistakable. Metal objects, definitely more than one, moving around in liquid. Not the hollow slosh of gasoline, but something dense and substantial that clinked against the tank walls with each vibration of the engine. Cade cut the motor and the barn fell silent except for the distant whistle of wind through the broken roof. The sudden quiet seemed to make Mrs. Hendricks even more nervous. She dropped her keys twice before managing to get them into the ignition of her sedan. The brothers exchanged a look that said everything without words. In 20 years of working on engines together, they'd never encountered anything like this. River walked around to the fuel tank and pressed his ear against the metal surface again. When he rapped his knuckles against different sections, the sound varied dramatically. Some areas rang hollow. Others produced a dull thud that suggested the tank contained something far heavier than gasoline. Mrs. Hendricks started her car and rolled down the window. "You boys need anything else, or can I head back to town?" Her voice carried a forced casualness that didn't match the tension in her shoulders. Cade straightened up, his mechanic's instincts telling him this deal was either too good to be true or exactly the break they desperately needed. "Ma'am, did your uncle ever mention why he kept this engine in such good condition? Most barn finds are rust buckets, but this one looks like it was maintained yesterday." She laughed, but it came out shaky and artificial. Uncle Pete was always tinkering with things. Guess he took better care of his equipment than most folks. She put the car in drive. "I'll be at the hardware store in town for about an hour if you need to reach me. After that, I'm heading back to Dallas." As her car disappeared down the gravel drive, River voiced what they were both thinking. "She's running from something, Cade, and whatever's in this tank, she knows about it." The engine sat between them like a mechanical riddle, its fuel tank holding secrets that could either save their business or complicate their lives in ways they couldn't imagine. Cade had brought a hand pump and empty containers, planning to drain the old fuel before transport. Standard procedure for any engine that had been sitting for decades. But now, with Mrs. Hendricks gone, and the strange sound still echoing in their minds, the simple task felt loaded with possibilities. River pulled out his smartphone and started recording video as Cade prepared the pump. If they were about to discover something valuable, they needed documentation. Their father had always taught them to cover their tracks in business dealings, especially when money was tight and opportunities were scarce. The pump primer squeezed easily, too easily, like the fuel lines had been used recently despite the supposed decades of storage. When Cade attached the siphon hose to the tank opening, the smell that emerged wasn't the sharp bite of old gasoline, but something metallic and earthy that neither brother could identify. River's phone camera captured every detail as the first liquid began flowing through the clear plastic tube. But what came out wasn't the amber or dark brown of aged fuel. It was crystal clear, like water, with something glinting at the bottom of the storage container that made both brothers freeze in place. The first object to emerge from the clear liquid was unmistakably a coin, but not like any coin either brother had ever seen. River caught it as it tumbled from the drain tube into the container, his calloused fingers immediately recognizing the weight of precious metal. The disc was roughly the size of a silver dollar, but significantly heavier, with intricate engravings that caught the barn light like tiny mirrors. Even covered in the strange preservative liquid, the golden surface gleamed with an intensity that made both men's hearts race. Cade leaned over his brother's shoulder as River wiped the coin clean with his shirt. The date stamped into the metal read 1847, and the image showed a liberty head with flowing hair surrounded by 13 stars. Neither brother was a coin expert, but they both knew enough to recognize something potentially valuable when they held it in their hands. But this was just the beginning. As more liquid drained from the tank, additional coins began appearing in the flow, each one clinking against the container walls with that distinctive metallic song they'd heard earlier. Some were identical to the first. Others bore different dates and designs. A few showed an eagle with spread wings. Others featured seated liberty figures that spoke of American history from nearly 2 centuries past. River's phone continued recording as coin after coin emerged from what should have been a fuel tank. The clear liquid, which they now realized must be some kind of mineral oil or preservative solution, had kept the precious metals in pristine condition despite decades of storage. The discovery explained everything about the engine's mysterious condition. Someone had converted this innocent farm equipment into the world's most elaborate safe. After 20 minutes of draining, they'd collected over 40 coins, each one potentially worth hundreds or thousands of dollars to collectors. But the tank wasn't empty yet. The liquid continued to flow, and heavier objects were still shifting around inside the metal chamber. River could hear them sliding against each other as the fluid level dropped, creating a sound like distant thunder. Cade's hands were shaking as he held up one particularly striking piece, an 1854 $20 gold coin that looked like it had been minted yesterday. "Brother, do you understand what we're looking at here? These aren't just old coins. These are museum pieces. Some of these dates..." He paused, checking his phone's internet connection to search for comparable sales. "Holy hell, River. This single coin sold at auction last year for $18,000. The implications hit both brothers simultaneously. They weren't just looking at a solution to their business problems anymore. They were potentially holding enough wealth to change their entire lives, buy back their family shop, and set up their children's futures. But the discovery also raised uncomfortable questions about Mrs. Hendricks and her uncle's true intentions. River set down his phone and studied his brother's face. "Cade, what if she knew? What if this whole sale was a setup? Maybe her uncle told her what was in here before he died, and she's been waiting for the right suckers to come along and take it off her hands." The possibility seemed increasingly likely as they considered the evidence. Mrs. Hendricks had been eager to complete the sale, nervous about their questions, and suspiciously quick to leave once the money changed hands. If she knew about the coins, selling the engine for $800 would be the perfect crime. Let someone else discover the treasure and deal with any legal complications that might arise. But even as doubt crept into their minds, neither brother could deny the reality of what lay before them. The tank was still draining, and whatever remained inside was too heavy to be more coins. As the liquid level dropped further, larger objects began emerging from the tank's depths. The first was a leather pouch, waterproofed and sealed, that felt substantial in River's hands. Inside, wrapped in oiled cloth, they found a collection of paper bills, unlike anything either brother had seen outside of a museum. The currency bore dates from the 1920s and 1930s, with denominations that no longer existed in modern circulation. Some were silver certificates, others gold certificates, all in pristine condition thanks to their careful preservation. But the leather pouch contained more than just paper money. Nestled between the bills were additional gold coins from different eras, including several $20 St. Gaudens pieces that Cade recognized from his grandfather's coin-collecting hobby. Each piece represented serious money, the kind of wealth that could transform two struggling mechanics into financially secure businessmen overnight. River's estimation skills, honed by years of evaluating scrap metal and automotive parts, suggested they were looking at a treasure worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, possibly more. But with each new discovery came increased anxiety about the legal implications of their find. Who had hidden this fortune? And why had Mrs. Hendricks really sold them the engine? The tank continued to drain, revealing one final object that dwarfed everything they'd found so far. It was a metal box, roughly the size of a cigar humidor, sealed with what appeared to be marine-grade gaskets and wrapped in multiple layers of plastic sheeting. The weight of the container suggested it contained something even more valuable than the coins and currency they'd already discovered. Cade's phone buzzed with an incoming text message from his wife Sarah, asking about the farm equipment purchase and whether they'd found anything worth the long drive. He stared at the screen, trying to figure out how to explain their discovery without sounding completely insane. How do you tell someone that you've just stumbled upon what might be the find of a lifetime? River was more concerned about immediate practical matters. Brother, we need to think this through carefully. If this stuff is as valuable as it looks, we're talking about a serious legal situation. What if Mrs. Hendricks's uncle stole these coins? What if they're supposed to be in a museum or belong to some collector who reported them missing decades ago? The possibility had occurred to Cade as well. Treasure hunters and metal detector enthusiasts always faced questions about ownership and provenance when they made significant discoveries. The difference was that those people were actively searching for valuable items. The Morrison brothers had simply been trying to buy used farm equipment and accidentally stumbled into what appeared to be a carefully constructed hiding place. They decided to open the metal box before making any decisions about their next steps. River's knife cut through the plastic wrapping easily, revealing a container that had been sealed with professional-grade materials designed to protect against moisture and corrosion for extended periods. Whatever was inside had been intended to remain hidden for a very long time. The lid opened with a soft hiss of escaping air, and both brothers found themselves staring at something that made their previous discoveries seem modest by comparison. Nestled in custom-fitted foam padding were larger gold pieces, including what appeared to be bars or ingots rather than coins. Each piece bore official markings and serial numbers that suggested they had once been part of a legitimate precious metals collection or investment portfolio. But underneath the gold, wrapped in a final layer of protective material, they found something that changed everything they thought they knew about their purchase. It was a letter, written in faded ink on letterhead from a bank that had been closed since the Great Depression, and the letter was addressed to someone named Morrison. The letter was dated December 15, 1934, written on official letterhead from First National Bank of Amarillo. River held the aged paper carefully as Cade read over his shoulder, both brothers struggling to process what they were seeing. The handwriting was precise and formal, the kind taught in business schools before typewriters became common. "Dear Mr. Samuel Morrison," the letter began, "as discussed during your visit last week, the bank can no longer guarantee the security of your safety deposit box contents due to the current economic climate and recent federal banking regulations. We recommend you make alternative arrangements for your valuables as soon as possible." Cade's throat went dry. Samuel Morrison, their great-grandfather's name, according to family stories their father had told them years ago. The man who had supposedly lost everything in the stock market crash and disappeared west, leaving behind only debts and broken promises. But according to this letter, Samuel Morrison hadn't lost everything at all. River continued reading aloud. "Your collection of gold certificates, mint-condition St. Gaudens coins, and precious metal investments represent substantial wealth that should be preserved for future generations of your family. The enclosed inventory list details each item we have removed from your deposit box at your request. The inventory was attached on a separate sheet, typewritten and comprehensive. Every coin they'd found was listed, along with several dozen more pieces still unaccounted for. The total value listed in $1934 made both brothers' heads spin, but the implications went far deeper than money. Their great-grandfather hadn't been a failure. He'd been smart enough to see the banking crisis coming, and had moved his wealth into physical assets before the worst of the Depression hit. The farm engine had been his hiding place, a piece of equipment so common and unremarkable that nobody would think to look inside its fuel tank for treasure. But the letter raised uncomfortable questions about Mrs. Hendricks and her supposed Uncle Pete. If this treasure belonged to Samuel Morrison, and if Samuel was their great-grandfather, then what right did Mrs. Hendricks have to sell it? Had her Uncle Pete stolen the engine from the Morrison family decades ago? Or had their great-grandfather sold or traded the equipment to someone else before he died? Cade pulled out his phone and started searching for information about Samuel Morrison and Amarillo banking records from the 1930s. What he found in the first few search results made his stomach drop. Samuel Morrison had been reported missing in 1935, shortly after withdrawing his entire fortune from First National Bank. Local newspapers had speculated about foul play, but no body was ever found, and the case went cold. River was thinking along the same lines. Brother, what if our great-grandfather didn't just disappear? What if someone killed him for this treasure and took the engine? What if Mrs. Hendricks's family has been sitting on stolen goods for 90 years? The possibility meant they weren't just dealing with valuable antiques anymore. They were potentially holding evidence in an unsolved murder case from the Great Depression. Even if the legal statute of limitations had expired, the moral implications were staggering. The treasure in their hands might have cost their great-grandfather his life. But there was another possibility, one that made Cade's hands shake as he held the phone. What if Samuel Morrison had successfully hidden his treasure and lived out his days quietly under another name? What if he'd always planned for his descendants to find this wealth someday? The inventory list contained a final detail that changed everything. At the bottom, written in the same careful handwriting, was a note. For my grandsons, when they're old enough to understand why I had to disappear. Samuel Morrison had known he was in danger back in 1934. River's phone showed an active internet connection, so Cade started searching for current auction prices while his brother continued examining the inventory list. The first search result made him whistle low under his breath. A single 1854 St. Gaudens $20 gold piece in pristine condition had sold 3 months ago for $42,000. They had 17 of them. He kept searching, cross-referencing each coin type and date from the inventory against recent sales. The numbers were staggering. The 1933 double eagles alone were worth over $1 million each if they were authentic, and Samuel Morrison's inventory listed 3 of them. The silver certificates from the 1920s were trading for 10 times their face value among collectors, and they had several hundred bills in perfect condition. River looked over Cade's shoulder as the total climbed higher with each search. Conservative estimates put their discovery at over $3 million, but some of the rarer pieces could push that number much higher at the right auction. The title's promise of millions wasn't an exaggeration. It was conservative, but the more valuable their find became, the more dangerous their situation felt. Cade's searches had also revealed that major coin discoveries always attracted federal attention. The IRS wanted their cut of any treasure finds. Museums filed claims for historically significant pieces. And if there was any question about ownership or provenance, the courts could tie up collections in legal battles for years. River voiced what they were both thinking. Cade, this is way bigger than 2 broke mechanics can handle quietly. We're talking about the kind of money that gets people killed. Look what happened to our great-grandfather. The morning sun had climbed higher, making the barn feel like an oven, but both brothers were sweating from stress rather than heat. Every decision they made from this point forward would have consequences that could affect their families for generations. Walk away, and they'd spend the rest of their lives wondering what if. Keep the treasure, and they might spend years looking over their shoulders. Cade tried calling Mrs. Hendricks, but her phone went straight to voicemail. According to the hardware store clerk he reached next, she'd left town over an hour ago, claiming she had to get back to Dallas for a family emergency. The timing felt too convenient to be coincidental. River started taking detailed photos of every coin, bill, and document with his phone. creating a digital record of their discovery. His law enforcement training from his Army days had taught him to document everything when dealing with potential criminal evidence. If they were going to move forward, they needed proof of what they'd found and how they'd found it. But as he photographed the inventory list, River noticed something that made his blood run cold. The handwriting at the bottom wasn't the same as the rest of the letter. The note about grandsons was written in different ink, with slightly different penmanship. Someone else had added that message years after Samuel Morrison wrote the original letter. Cade saw his brother's expression change. "What is it?" River showed him the discrepancy in the handwriting. The implications were immediate and terrifying. Someone had known about this treasure for decades, someone who knew enough about the Morrison family tree to forge a heartfelt message from their great-grandfather. Mrs. Hendricks hadn't stumbled onto this engine by accident. They'd been set up from the beginning. But why? The answer came in the form of a black pickup truck turning into the farm's gravel driveway, moving fast enough to kick up a dust cloud visible through the barn's open doors. The pickup truck stopped 20 yards from the barn entrance, and two people climbed out. Mrs. Hendricks emerged from the passenger side, her earlier nervousness replaced by grim determination. The driver was a tall man in his 60s, wearing a crisp white shirt and expensive boots that had never seen real farm work. River recognized the type immediately. City money trying to look rural. The man walked toward them with the confident stride of someone accustomed to getting his way. "Gentlemen, I'm Robert Hendricks, Patricia's husband. We need to talk about what you found in that engine." Cade stepped protectively in front of the treasure, his mechanic's instincts telling him this situation was about to get complicated fast. "Seems like your wife already completed our business transaction, Mr. Hendricks. We paid for this engine fair and square." Robert Hendricks smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Fair and square assumes both parties knew what they were buying and selling. The legal situation is more complex than a simple sale. River kept his phone recording as tension filled the barn. "What exactly are you saying?" Mrs. Hendricks finally spoke, her voice shaky. "My Uncle Pete spent 40 years researching the ownership of those coins. Samuel Morrison disappeared in 1935, but he never officially died. There was no estate, no legal heirs on record." The words hit both brothers like ice water. If there were no legal heirs, their claim to the treasure could be worthless. Worse, they might be holding stolen property that belonged to the state or federal government. Robert continued, pulling out a thick folder. Pete consulted lawyers, checked court records, hired private investigators. The coins exist in a legal gray area. Morrison withdrew them legally, but his disappearance complicated everything. Cade's throat went dry. "So what happens to the treasure?" "That depends," Mrs. Hendricks said quietly, "on whether you can prove your family connection to Samuel Morrison." River felt the weight of potential disaster. "What kind of proof?" Robert opened the folder, revealing decades of meticulous research. Pete found newspaper articles suggesting Samuel made it to California, birth certificates, marriage records, family trees, but the trail went cold in 1972. The brothers exchanged worried glances. Their father had told them stories about their great-grandfather, but family legends weren't legal documents. Without proof of their connection to Samuel Morrison, they could lose everything. Mrs. Hendricks reached into her purse and pulled out a smaller envelope. Pete left instructions. "If the Morrison family ever found the treasure, we should give them this." River opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a death certificate from Los Angeles County, dated 1972. Samuel Morrison, age 91, survived by son William Morrison of Dallas, Texas. Cade's voice was barely a whisper. "William Morrison. That was our grandfather's name." Mrs. Hendricks smiled through tears. "Pete spent his own inheritance trying to solve this mystery. He found your grandfather in the 1970s, but William died before Pete could contact him. Pete never stopped looking for Samuel's remaining family, but Robert's expression remained serious. Even with the death certificate, you'll need more documentation. The IRS will want their cut. Museums might claim historical significance, and if other relatives surface with competing claims, the treasure that had seemed like salvation moments ago now felt like a legal nightmare waiting to happen. River looked at the coins scattered around them, each one potentially worth a fortune or absolutely nothing, depending on lawyers and judges they'd never met. Mrs. Hendricks handed Cade another document. Pete's final gift. A complete genealogical report tracing your family line back to Samuel Morrison, with legal opinions confirming your inheritance rights. But as Cade read the papers, He realized their problems were just beginning. 6 months later, Cade stood in the expanded Morrison Brothers automotive shop, watching River install a custom exhaust system on a restored 1969 Camaro. The new building was 3 times the size of their old location. Modern equipment filled every bay. The customer list had grown beyond their wildest dreams. The treasure had been worth exactly what the title promised. The first auction brought in $2.8 million. The remaining coins, still being evaluated, could push the total past $4 million. Pete Hendrix's legal research had been perfect. Every document the IRS demanded was already in the files. Every genealogical connection was documented and notarized. But the path hadn't been smooth. The federal government had seized the collection for 3 months while Treasury agents verified the coin's authenticity. Museums had filed claims for the rarest pieces. Distant relatives had emerged from nowhere, demanding their share. River's military training and Pete's obsessive record-keeping had saved them. Every coin was photographed, cataloged, and legally documented. The inheritance attorneys Pete had consulted 20 years earlier still practiced law and remembered his research. When the dust settled, the Morrison brothers owned every piece legally and completely. Sarah Morrison now managed their expanded operations from a glass office overlooking the main floor. The woman who once worried about grocery money now coordinated with Sotheby's about rare coin auctions. She handled investment portfolios worth millions while tracking the shop's growing revenue from legitimate automotive work. The business had exploded after word spread about their incredible find. Customers came hoping lightning might strike twice. They brought barn finds, estate sale purchases, and family heirlooms for the Morrison brothers to examine. Most contained nothing but rust and memories, but the brothers never charged for looking. River had framed Pete Hendrix's research in the waiting area, next to photographs of Samuel Morrison they'd found in California archives. Customers always asked about the display. River loved telling the story, watching faces light up as he described their great-grandfather's Depression-era survival strategy. Mrs. Hendrix visited monthly, bringing cookies and updates on Pete's other research projects. The brothers had insisted on sharing 15% of the auction proceeds with her, despite her protests. Pete's integrity had made their fortune possible. Honor demanded they honor his memory. The 1950s Farmall engine sat in the front window, restored to perfect condition. A simple plaque read, "Samuel Morrison Engine, family legacy preserved through the generosity of Pete Hendrix." Regular customers knew there was more to the story, but the brothers had learned the value of quiet discretion. The real treasure wasn't the millions in the bank. It was the knowledge that integrity could survive across generations. Pete had spent 40 years doing the right thing, waiting for the Morrison family to come home. Cade's phone buzzed with another restoration inquiry. Business was booming. They could afford to be selective now, choosing projects that challenged their skills rather than just paying bills. River wiped his hands and walked over to his brother. "Remember when we thought $800 was a huge gamble?" Cade smiled, looking around at the thriving business built on their great-grandfather's hidden legacy. Samuel Morrison was smarter than any bank president. He knew the only safe investment was family. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, illuminating golden dust motes that danced in the air. 2 brothers who had risked everything on forgotten farm equipment had found their way home to a fortune that had been waiting 90 years for them to discover it. River turned to a customer examining the display engine and started telling the story again. His voice carried the same excitement as the first day they drained that impossible fuel tank. Some stories never got old, especially when they ended with millions in the bank and the knowledge that sometimes, just sometimes, taking a chance on something forgotten can change your life forever. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to discover another tale where ordinary people stumble upon extraordinary secrets. Don't forget to subscribe and consider leaving a super chat to help us bring you more incredible stories. Your support means everything to us.